Is that all right if I stand here? If I sit down, I think I'd be a little bit nervous. I feel a little bit better standing up. I hope my jitters will get better as we go. But welcome, everybody, and Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. I have two parts of my presentation. The first part of my presentation is going to be about incidental learning and how that applies to the Vineyard second generation. Incidental learning. Well, let me back up 1 minute. Research shows that half of the deaf students graduate with a fourth grade reading level. 7 to 10% of the students graduate with a seventh grade level or above. So that leads to a lot of discussion about deaf education in the deaf community, discussing how can we improve that? And how do we improve their reading levels? Right now in the deaf community, the buzzword happens to be language acquisition. And I'd like to present another important aspect, which is incidental learning, along with language acquisition. They both go hand in hand and they kind of work parallel together. So all of you are hearing people and you have access to information through incidental learning. Often you don't even realize that you're getting that information or picking up new information. Typically you'll pick up that new information and you'll store it, kind of file it away in your brain. And if you've already experienced it, you'll be able to bring it up with a friend or a group in discussion. So then if you hear that piece of knowledge again, you'll be able to discuss it and you'll remember it from somewhere. But if you go back and you try to think, where did I learn that from? It wasn't from school. Where else could I have learned that from? It's possible that it could be an incidental learning where you take your information, you store it away, and then once you hear it or see it again, then you can attach it to something that you already have inside your brain. Okay, I want to discuss 3 different types of learning, different theories connected with incidental learning. So there's formal learning, informal learning, and incidental learning. Formal learning is basically your general structure of learning, like sitting in a classroom in school. That's where they have an actual agenda and they're teaching you the information. Or like me standing up here, I have an agenda of the things that I'm going to talk about and explain to you, which is incidental learning. So I have goals that I want you to learn, and so that is a formal way of learning. Informal way really doesn't have a structure. It happens in small groups, small audiences, different side conversations where you learn things. That's informal learning. Incidental learning, it can happen either during formal or informal learning. Incidental learning tends to happen through your environment, where you're hearing information all around you, and some things stick and some don't. You'll store away information, whether you think it's important or not. So most of you will gain that auditorily, where you'll pick up all that incidental information. You'll hear things coming and going. More specific with incidental learning, incidental learning impacts groups of people completely different, especially with the deaf and hard of hearing communities and hearing communities. I want to kind of discuss 3 different areas or methods of how we pick up incidental learning. So there's access to information, there's your fund of knowledge, so looking at deaf children, typically incidental learning will start at home for children. You'll learn things from your parents by hearing. So with hearing children, you'll learn things from your parents by hearing things or having the TV on or different things like that. And then you'll learn to copy those things or hear those things, and you'll remember those things as you're growing up. Typically, social media has a big role in incidental learning as well. So now for deaf children, incidental learning is through their peers. And the reason being is that typically 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents. And 75% of those hearing parents are not able to conversationally talk with their children or sign with their children. So they'll learn how to sign, but they are not able to have an in-depth conversation with their child. It's very limited. So then when the student goes into the classroom, either at the deaf school or school, they will get information from their peers. So remember, 90% of deaf children are with hearing parents, and they have limited language skills. The deaf children from deaf parents, they receive incidental learning all the time. It's available to them all the time because they are able to see and learn the language as it's happening. So if there's children that don't go to the deaf school, they have to learn things from their peers. And so the deaf children that have deaf parents will usually typically be those peers that will give them the information. And that's how they socially share the information with each other. So that's how the deaf typically get their information, incidental learning information, is through their peers. With hearing incidental language, it's through visual, it's through auditory. But because with deaf people, the auditory isn't there, they get it through visual. So to access information, hearing people typically pick up information 24/7. If you're riding in the car, you have your radio on, the information is there. There's a lot of stimulants that are going on in your environment. And a lot of that stimulus has information. And that's where you're picking up your information from incidental learning. Deaf people only have visual stimuli. What's happening in front of them, the things that they can catch on from there, those are the things that they can tuck away for later. Hearing people have more access to information in general. So oftentimes deaf don't learn through auditory means. They have to have direct instruction to get that information. While hearing people tend to get that just from everyday things, going around and picking up things. They're able to expand their fund of knowledge. Deaf people have to be taught specifically direct instruction for those things. And when we're looking at the fund of knowledge, your fund of knowledge is how much information you have and the different topics and subjects that you have and that you know about. So deaf people's fund of knowledge is typically usually limited. So your brain will decide when you're having this stimulus if it will decide to save that information or not. It will file it away, and then that stimulus, it will just keep filing the information away. And sometimes it'll filter out some of the information, and sometimes it'll keep it. But in the back of your brain, you basically have, or in your subconscious, you have a fund of knowledge from your experiences, from social exchanges, from different perspectives. While the deaf's fund of knowledge is more limited to what they've learned visually. So it's important that we are there supporting that incidental learning and that fund of knowledge. So now I want to talk about how that's kind of related to incidental. Incidental learning is related to the Vineyard second generation. Okay, I'm going to go back 1 second because I wanted to share a couple personal stories. I want to share 2 of my experiences. When children are little, they usually have, it's the typical family dinner syndrome. So my parents were hearing. I have 2 brothers, and we were having a dinner, and the family was all around, and everybody was talking and discussing different things that were going on. And I typically sat there and just kind of struggled to follow along with what the conversation was. So most of the time I would just ignore it and then just focus on finishing dinner and having no clue what they were talking about. And one specific time I can remember that my parents were talking about going to my grandparents' farm. And my 2 older brothers were there, and they heard it, and they got extremely excited to go. And so they had decided that at the end of the week on Friday, they would go out to the farm. Well, I had no clue. And I thought, I was looking at my brother thinking, why is he so excited, or what was he looking forward to? But I just kind of let it go. And so then at the end of the week, Friday afternoon came, and my brother came home, and both of them started packing, and I was wondering, what are you packing for? What's going on? I didn't know that they had planned to go visit my grandparents' farm, and they had been so excited about it. But looking back, they overheard that from my parents' comments and that discussion, and they became excited and started to look forward to going to my grandparents' farm. All week they were excited and looking forward to what they were going to do. Well, I had no clue that was even happening. You know, my life just kept continuing without any idea. I didn't have any excitement to go to grandparents' farm or anything. So when I went in and saw my brothers packing, they had picked up information through incidental learning. And so incidental learning can be very important. So 80 to 90% of the things that you learn really are through incidental learning, while 10 to 20% are through direct instruction, sitting down one-on-one and teaching. So 80 to 90% is what you get from the stimulus and the environment around you. You just pick that information up. But deaf don't have that access to it. My second experience with incidental learning really affected me through work. So there was a benefits program, and I recently just found out about this, like maybe a couple months ago. So I got a job working for the state of Minnesota, and when I started working there, they had a vacation program, a vacation benefit that had the minimum of 5 hours. And I've been working there for almost 2.5 years, and so I've been trying to save up time for vacation so I could plan a vacation. And so I have 5 hours every 2 weeks, and it's not a lot, but one of my coworkers, I think has been with there maybe 6 or 7 months, who is also hearing, had a conversation with, I don't know if it was a friend of hers or if it was her boss or who it was, but she had overheard that they had another program where if your prior job and your duties were pretty similar to what you're doing now, part of that vacation time that you had earned can be brought over and used with your vacation time now. And so she was able to get that extra time. She got an extra 3 hours on top of that. So every 2 weeks, she was getting 8 hours. So then we had a staff meeting. And my colleague was preparing for her vacation. And she asked me, well, how come you're not going on vacation? And I said, well, I need to get some more vacation time saved up and then I can go. And we kind of started discussing it from then. And that's when my colleague let me know about this other program where you could run vacation time over to your new job. And I missed out on that opportunity in that program for a year and a half because it just happened through overhearing a conversation about it. And they were able to take advantage of that just by the stimulus in the environment and what's going around them. So incidental learning is extremely important, and it can help you advance in your jobs, with your benefits for work, and within specific fields that you work in. So fund of knowledge. Okay, I'm just thinking, did I talk about fund of knowledge now? Yeah, yep, okay. So this is a quote from Gallaudet University. How we understand ourselves, our culture, rules for how people and families communicate, and where we fit in the world, all of this is strongly influenced by incidental learning. This is a very important part of our everyday living and everyday learning. One other thing that I forgot to mention that I want to add. Research shows now 85 to 87% of deaf students are mainstreamed. So if you think about that, 85 to 80% of those mainstream students, their communication way is through sign. The auditory information and learning through auditory means is usually gone. And so that means they're delayed in their education in the mainstream setting as well, because their only exposure through that incidental language, especially like, hearing things from peers in the hallways, or when you get into class and you sit down and you're getting ready for class, they don't have that access to the information. They're not able to discuss those everyday things that are happening. So there's really a gap in that part of the education. And the last part I wanted to discuss is Vineyard Second Generation. I've just got a short clip here before that. So this is a good example of what incidental learning is. The parents, I'll give you a little background on this. The parents are deaf. The baby, I think, is 16 or 17 months old. And the baby himself is hearing. But you notice that he was trying to hold up his phone and sign to the phone. It's obvious that he's learned that from the parents and how they communicate through their video phones if they're talking to relatives or friends. They have a video phone and then they sign to it. And so the baby has seen his family do this numerous times. And so he's trying to copy what he's seen. That's part of an incidental learning that he's learned from his parents and how to communicate through sign. I think that's just a really good example of incidental learning, especially because the baby is hearing themselves. Now, Vineyard Second Generation is a nonprofit organization who is providing services for deaf and hard of hearing. It has 3 founders. One of them is Stacy Tornell, who is the interpreter. Lori Bigasa and Michelle Rolowitz are the 3 founders. They set up with the goal of having an ASL immersion daycare childcare center. So it would have deaf and hard of hearing children as well as hearing children. And eventually they started adding on to these ideas. And so we have other areas that we're hoping to develop in the future, but right now we're focusing specifically on the child care program. We're hoping to set up the child care environment with all sign, so the staff will either be deaf themselves, native signers, or fluent ASL users. And it will be totally 100% in an immersion setting all day, every day, using sign. So it's not going to be only limited to deaf and hard of hearing children. It will be available to hearing children also who would like that bilingual experience. So it will be 6 weeks to about 6 years old. And we plan on adding more programs throughout that. We'll be teaching some baby sign language. We'll be having some resources for adults. It won't be limited. We might have some classes that will provide sign, but we won't have a limitation to it. It will be 100% full immersion, full signing, all day, every day. And so the daycare should be set up quite soon. And we're looking forward to adding the possibilities of different programs, such as mentoring for school-aged children, adding some of that incidental learning and reinforcing that to help them bridge the gap between the hearing and the deaf world. So what the hearing people are learning through incidental learning, we want to make sure that the deaf children are learning that as well. We feel that incidental languages is a huge important thing, and so to practice that at the daycare with the children and giving them the access to incidental learning is very important to us. So, thank you all for your time and for listening.